Howdy YouTube, and welcome to this episode of The Gunman. So today we're going to be taking you guys through the repair and prep work procedure on this BMW 520D. The car itself I wouldn't say is anything that special. It is getting a little bit long in the tooth, as you may be able to see near the rear windscreen. Even some of the mouldings and trims are actually starting to perish. So all that aside, let's just get straight into it. So the first thing that you may have noticed me do was checking the color, and I'm using PPG Envirobase at the moment, and as long as I get a good looking color chip, most of the time I will just mix and paint it, especially if you're blending. Now there was one or two small sections that the color was going edge to edge, one part being the rear bumper and another part being just up at the top of that boot lid, but the color was good enough that I decided that I didn't actually need to do my own spray out, because those spray out cards that you see have actually already been sprayed out for me, and they have been sprayed out by hand with 2-pack clear. So I've found that the colors do replicate, so I don't get much, if any, color difference from the color chip to me going in and spraying it. So as I say, I've found personally that I don't need to waste that extra sort of 5 or 10 minutes in doing a spray out. But all that aside, the first thing you may have noticed me do after checking the color was cleaning the panels down. I used a bit of methylated spirits and water mixed, so just go all over all the edges, especially where that year's worth of dirt has accumulated inside the door jambs and things like that. So continuing on with the job, I've got my blocks. It's actually a new block kit, well, relatively new to me. I've had it for a few months now. Pretty handy little block set that I've got there. It's a 3M branded one. The only real downside of it is that there is no dust extraction, but in this shop here we've actually got dust extraction pits in the floor, so it's not that big of a deal, and I do have the vacuum set up for when I'm using my orbital sander. So as you may notice here, this is not the way things are meant to go when I'm blocking a repair down. My job is generally, well, in a perfect world, is just to give it like a bit of a light block with say 240, and then orbital sander it down and then go into the booth. But as you can see there, the filler repairs really weren't that good, to be honest. That doesn't bother me, and I'm not calling out the panel beater that did the job. It really doesn't bother me. It's just something that happens sometimes. They get their repairs wrong. And as it turns out here, I'm using some UV cured body fillers. So I'm actually going to be doing a specific standalone review on these body fillers. So we won't be talking about it too much for now, but I will tell you now, this stuff is absolutely amazing. I've been totally blown away by this stuff. You wouldn't believe the dry times of it. It's like 10 seconds or even less. So I've got actually two different ones. You may just have noticed there was a green one on my trolley there as well, and this is the pink canned one. So the pink one is more for like a body filler, and the green one is sort of like a painter's putty, so more like for pinholes and stone chips and stuff like that. One of the things that I really do like about it is that there's minimal wastage. So the only wastage you really get is what you sand off, if you know what I mean. So the excess filler that you end up sanding off, because you put what you don't use back into the can. So I've actually found, like, I've been using this stuff for a couple of months now, and I'm still on my first two containers, so you really don't use too much. But this is actually one thing that I like to do with it, because it's similar to the UV primers that are on the market, and anyone that's used them will know that when you do use it, you'll need to sort of like clean that top layer off. It goes a little bit slimy, so it'll sort of like clog up your sandpaper. Now there's a couple of ways to get around that, and one way is what you see me doing here. I actually came up with this way myself, and that's just getting the back edge of a razor blade and literally just scraping that top layer off. The other way around it is to just get some Prepsol or thinners or some kind of a cleaning solvent to remove that top layer. But I've actually found that the razor blade works better, because you're taking a little bit more off. Like sometimes using thinners or Prepsol, you can actually still be left with a very light sort of sticky layer on the top. As I said, it takes about 10 seconds. So because that was a slightly larger area, I did like 10 seconds on each patch. And as you notice here, I am reapplying because it was actually still a little bit low. So being that it's UV primer, you do have to think about the fact that the light needs to penetrate all the way down to the bottom layer, so right down to the bottom. So if you apply too much, the UV light won't be able to penetrate through the filler itself down to the bottom layer. So that's another reason why what I will do is I'll put the light onto it, I'll then sand it, and then I'll get the light again and give it another sort of, 10 or 20 seconds, depending on the size of the repair. As I say, a job like this, I'll do it in sort of like 2 to 3 sections. That will actually also depend on the UV light that I'm using. So I've actually got a couple of different UV lights, but as I say, we'll be getting further into the details of the UV body fillers and those lights in another video coming soon, so stay tuned for that. Be sure to subscribe if you're not already. But I should make a quick mention to the fact that I've found you're actually best off going a little bit coarser with the sandpaper. So with my standard polyester body fillers, like the lightweight body fillers, I've found like a small repair like that, I could go like 180 grit or even 120 grit to sand the repairs down with. But these UV fillers seem to be like a little bit harder, so I would actually even go 80 grit and then step it down through the grade. So I'd go 80 grit, 120, 180, and then as you saw me doing there, going over the top of that with some 320 grit. That's just to get rid of the deep scratches, and then we're going to be not far off, ready to prime. Obviously you just saw me going over the edges, and I was just using some 320 grit on one of those soft back sanding sponges. Then I gave it a quick mask up just with a couple of pieces of paper. And we've got some 2-pack primer filler here. So it's the PPG LVP219, I think was the code off it. And you may be wondering, oh, why didn't you just use some of your whiz bang UV primer on a repair like that? Because my answer would be that that's a little bit big of a repair to really want to use UV primer. Like I usually use the UV primer just on the more of the small sections. As much as I do love my UV products, they are not the best for everything. I've just found they're not totally ideal for every situation. One thing that does kind of boggle me about the UV fillers and primers is that it doesn't shrink. So there is no VOCs in it, so there's no evaporation at all. So how you spray it down is how it is, the same profile once it's dried, which is not the case for your polyester primers and body fillers and stuff like that. So it will continue curing over time. So that's why you may have noticed that I put the infrared heat lights on the primer before we did block it down, and that's to make sure that the shrinking happens before we take it in the booth and spray it. Because if you didn't do that, well then the primer is still going to be actually moving maybe for the next couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, depending on how warm it is in your environment. And yeah, that's not what you want, because then some of those deeper sanding scratches that you've left in your repair stage will actually start showing through. I'm sure anyone in the trade knows exactly what I'm talking about. But anyway, continuing on with the job, I gave the repairs a good block down with 180 grit. That's what I like to block my repairs down with. Now, if it was a smaller repair or a better repair, I probably would have hit it with something a little bit finer. So when I do little ping ding type, dents in the doors that I'm blending over, just the small ones, I'll usually do the repair, finish it off, then get a bit of UV primer or something like that down, but then I'll just give it a light block with say 320. So as I say, those sanding grits, they're just a guide, and it's not like a one size fits all. There's more than one way to skin a cat, as they say. So you're about to see me doing a little bit of UV primer. So this stuff really has revolutionized the industry for me anyway. It's definitely sped my procedure up massively. So what you see there is a little bit of a cut through back to body filler. Now, any painters will know what I'm talking about when I say back in the day before UV primer, that was like a reprime. So you would have to get some 2-pack primer out, get your infrared lights, and you would have a fair bit of downtime, because the 2-pack primer takes quite a lot of time to dry, and you've got to put the lights on it and all that stuff. Now this stuff here, because it goes hard as a rock and so fast, you can put it over that body filler, and if there's any pinholes that come up, well then you can either fill it in by just put it on a little bit heavier, but do be careful, you don't want to overload it. Now that is actually what I did on this. There was a couple of little pinholes that did come up, and I just put it on a little bit heavier, but as I say, just being very careful, because you do need to make sure that the light's going to penetrate right down to the bottom layer. But if you were not confident that you were going to be able to fill them up, well then you could just leave the pinholes in there. But because the UV primer is such a hard surface, you can go and just put some body filler into the pinholes, and it's going to be fine. But if you were to go and put, say, some 1K filler, some 1K primer over that, well, then your pinholes would come through, and then you'd have to get the heat onto it, or some like the heat gun onto it, and then you would get, say, some body filler to try to fill up the pinholes. And then what I had happen quite a few times when I tried to do that was that when you were applying the body filler, it would actually tear the 1K primer, because the 1K primer might have still been a little bit fresh, and it can just be a bit of a nightmare and a real time waste, especially when you've got 5 or 6 cars lined up and you've got a boss hounding you, come on man, I need these cars to go, I've promised the cars. So yes, that UV primer filler and now the UV body fillers, they are a real game changer. But look, don't get me wrong, there are times when a little bit of 1K primer is all you need. If you're confident that you're not going to get any pinholes coming up, as you see here, I just sprayed a little bit of the 1K primer, got the heat gun. It's just a very thin coat. It's not going to take that long to dry. That's all it needed. So in this instance, it was probably going to be quicker to just put a little bit of 1K on there, because if I was to go and use some of the UV primers, then I would have to put a couple of bits of paper, because it's more likely to get a bit of overspray because it's coming out of the gun, whereas the low pressure from the aerosol can, I didn't even need to do any masking up. It was far enough away from the door jambs that I knew I wasn't going to get any overspray in there. Now, one thing when you do use the 1K primers, I've found you can just give them a bit of a wet sand, even just with, say, 1200 grit. So yeah, I've found that sometimes dry sanding it can sort of like ball up and sort of tear, and just, yeah, it doesn't sand as nicely as it seems to when you do your wet sanding. So once I've got all the blend panels sanded down with the orbital sander, I like to go over the top of that with the grippy pads. So that's like a 1000 grit, but you can change that out with a piece of grey Scotch-Brite. Personally, I like to do all my sanding dry. I've found it to be a lot faster than the wet sanding. It's a lot neater. You can see down underneath me, there's no big, puddles of sludge, and people aren't forced to walk through that. And there we go. So you can see that I'm doing like a final wet check. So I'm pretty happy with the quality of that repair now. It did take a little bit longer than you would usually like it to, but it is what it is. Sometimes the panel beaters just don't get the jobs quite right, and I'm not calling him out for it. It really doesn't bother me. I'm just there to do my job. I'm actually pretty happy at work these days. I've got myself a Bluetooth earmuff headset, so I'll just be in there working away, listening to podcasts and having a good time. So this is a job when it's all finished off. I'm going to do a separate video on the masking and spray painting on this one, so that'll be coming up next week. So thanks heaps for watching, and if you haven't already, be sure to go and check out the link in the description. We've actually got some new merch, so check that out. I'd like to say a big thanks to everyone for watching, and if you'd like to support the channel further, you're more than welcome to go over and check out some of the merchandise we've got. My personal favourite is those spray suits, so they're a good quality Colad branded spray suit with the Gunman logo on it. There's also hats, drink coolers, hoodies and t-shirts, so be sure to go over and check out the link in the description if you are interested.